Welcome everybody to Photography Insights, the show that goes behind the scenes and interviews people from the photography world. Today I'm pleased to bring you episode 102, which is all about one of my favourite subjects, beer. During COVID, it's been great to get to the weekend after a hard day's work and relax with a couple of beers. Though obviously you should drink in moderation, just like me. Wink, wink. After a recent delivery from Beer52, I looked through the Ferment magazine and noticed some interesting articles. This work led me to the author behind the work, Matthew Curtis, a freelance photographer, blogger, podcaster, and now a magazine publisher. It was really interesting to talk with someone who actively has an interest in great beer, but also has the vocabulary to describe this. He can also talk and educate others through his photography work too. Matthew really has understood how to use each medium, like the written word, the spoken word, and photography. He's originally from my local area, and it's nice to hear about his roots and how he's travelled to other breweries around the world and how it's helped him. Matthew doesn't pull his punches with his writing, and he tells you honestly about his work, mistakes, and some thoughts about some of the breweries. He talks to us about his magazine label, Pellicle, its beginnings, and how COVID has affected the brand and his life. He also talks about his roots in adult life, how he stumbled into photography. He's now very experienced, works for a few brands, and even helps teach others. So in this one we discuss magazines, how to get paid for writing, beer varieties, lactose intolerances, supporting local businesses, Amazon versus online breweries, shooting fruit, learning editing, working with camera, layout versus imagery, pride and the north-south divides. Yes, Matthew eases his way through the random questions, but won't forget about thinking about hitmen from now on, trust me. So don't forget to check out Matthew's unique way of banning daydreaming too. In the show notes for this one, you'll find his links to things like his Instagram, the Pellicle magazine, his own podcast with the Pellicle magazine, and his Twitter feed. Now please do check him out. If you want any advice, want to discuss anything with beers and ales, please do use Twitter. He's very active on there, and he's always up for a discussion or debate. Trust me, there are plenty of them, and he likes his honesty. And obviously during the show we mention a few different brands, and there are links to some of these in the show notes too, including some of the podcasts he's appeared on, his training event, and obviously his writing for Ferment magazine. I'd also like to thank friends of the show before we go into the podcast. These individuals help contribute to the show by broadcasting this to people they work with, which is a very nice mutual thing we do for each other. On this occasion I'd like to talk about Static Age. Pete's got a lovely book out which I hope you'll all go check out. It's called Iceland by Nils Carlson. Nils is a fabulous artist that takes very dreamlike landscapes, but he's also done some like environmental type landscapes involving subject matter. He's a very talented artist. Hopefully we'll get him on the podcast in the near future. Lovely gentleman. He's on social media for those who want to check him out. But I've got a copy of this zine, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. And remember, he is a film artist as well. So please do check out Static Age. That is staticage.co.uk. And links to all these people are on the show notes. or for anyone checking out the website, they are always at the bottom of my homepage. While we're on the subject of the website, which is phlogger.co.uk, there is an article I've just wrote that is all about my experiences shooting in Sheffield. This is very different to my last piece of work. This one's all about using a digital camera. So I talk about the idea of creating something new from something old. Many of you know I don't shoot a lot of digital. The article's more about following the light and some of the things that you can do with it, about myself and my project work, and how some of the people have helped sort of scope my future, and some of the little playing things I've been doing. So it's not all about pristine gallery work. It's about work in progress, about learning, and what I do behind the scenes there. So I hope you do check that out. Obviously there's links in social media to that article. It's always nice to hear what people think of it. And remember, anyone visiting the website to listen to the podcast, you'll get to see extra content there from Matthew. He sent in some photos for you all to look at. There's some of his lovely work with breweries. So we may as well get on with the show, and let's await our host, the lovely Matthew Curtis from Pellicle magazine. And welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew.
Matthew.
It's really great to be here on this nice Tuesday evening, and I'm drinking water instead of beer, which is a bit different. But I've probably had a bit too many beers over the weekend, so got to take a break every now and again.
That's fair enough. I suppose your day job doesn't want to turn into your night job as well and drink all three of the night and day.
But yeah, I try and take a couple of days off in the week because there is a lot of beer involved in my work, as we'll discover.
Sounds good. I know when I first came across you through the magazine I was just showing you, which was the Ferment magazine. I came across that through, obviously, Beer52. I think I tried it last year, and then I tried it this year for myself. And I thought the Beer magazine really added something to it, because I'm not surrounded by people who try lots of different beers. We're not the sort of people who tend to go to many pubs. So this was like a really big insight into what's out there, and it's worldwide.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
I mean, the amount of breweries globally has exploded. I mean, in the UK, there's more than double the number of breweries there were 15 years ago, way more than double. But most of them are absolutely tiny and local. But the whole sort of image, like a lot of younger people got into beer and started a lot of businesses, and it all started in the United States, actually. So if you're not that into beer, you might go, hang on, American beer is not that great. Well, actually, from the sort of late 80s, a lot of the American brewers that started a decade before that, when homebrewing was made legal. I'll try and keep this short because I could go on about the beer history of the US for a long time. But basically, President Jimmy Carter made homebrewing legal in the US in 1978 and unwittingly set off a chain reaction for all these Americans starting their breweries. But they were inspired by English beer like bitter and cask ale and Belgian beer and things like that. And it just grew and grew and grew. It stuttered a bit in the late 90s, but then in the 2000s it started again. And there's over 8,000 breweries in the United States now. It's mad. When the global situation is over, if you go to the US, every town has so many breweries and brew pubs with it, everything you could try. And that's kind of been adopted all over the world, but nowhere more so than the UK, which is interesting because you've got like two sides of the same coin here. You still have a really great traditional British real ale camera culture, which is really important. But you've also got a very different modern beer scene where breweries are trying to create different styles of beer, and take influence from all over the world. So that's kind of what I do. Is I'm like a conduit. All this beer happens, I drink it all, and then I which is great, and then I write about it, and I photograph it, and run a magazine about it myself called Pellicle Magazine, with my friend Johnny Hamilton, who is a professional brewer. Yeah, that's kind of where I fit into beer as I guess a journalist. But it's it's not reporting. It's more like telling. It's more storytelling than reporting. Beer and Beer52 and Ferment is really interesting because I went freelance in 2016, and they were the first magazine to give me a regular beer column. And the funny story there is the previous editor said, "We'll send you some beer every month if you write a little column for us." And I replied saying, "That's really nice, but could you send me a little bit of money every month instead?" And they said yes. And I've been a regular contributor at Ferment, and I work under a great editor, Richard, who deserves a shout out. And I've just been working on 2 new features for their next issue today. So, and long fingers crossed, may that continue, because it's a great mag.
No, that's cool. So is that magazine only available?
You
through
can
the
subscribe to the magazine on its own as well, but I will say I don't work for Beer52. I'm freelance. I work for myself. But you subscribe to their beer box, and you pick how many beers you want, and you always get the magazine with that. But there is a magazine only subscription, or you can also read it online on the Beer52 website. So, but you generally find the articles come out on the website about a month after the magazine, and it's always there's not very many specialist print beer mags in the UK, so it's really great to have something like this that's so well done. It's kind of like the music magazines that I used to read a lot of 10, 15 years ago, because it just goes really in depth. It chats to the brewers, it goes behind the scenes, it talks about the ingredients, it talks about cities and places all over the world and the different beers you get there. So it's really immersive, and they've got, like, when I started writing for them, there was a handful of freelance writers, and now they've got like quite a big team of really amazing writers, and many of them who've become good friends of mine over the years. So Ferment, it's a really great magazine.
Okay, no, that's really cool. I think the magazine's really nice. I think as someone who enjoys trying different ales, it's nice to hear a little bit of the backstory. And I think last year when I got it, it was an American brewery, and I think one of them was Clown Shoes.
Yep.
And it was fantastic because I'd never tried like a grapefruit tart or whatever it was. It's lovely.
What's really interesting about beer now is that it's not. There is the most important thing to remember is this: the classics are still there, all the great lagers and bitters, whatever you like. No one's taking that away from you, but a lot of newer breweries are experimenting with a lot of different ingredients. That could be something like hops from another country. So English hops and North American hops taste completely different. So do Australian hops and New Zealand hops. A bit like grapes taste different depending on where they're cultivated in the world. But also a lot of breweries are playing around with anything they want, really. So adding fruit, adding lactose, milk sugar, which makes a beer creamy and sweeter, chocolate and cacao and vanilla. And honestly, a lot of these beers I'm not keen on. I like the classics. I like my beer to taste like beer, as boring as that may sound. But what's great though about the variety of beers that are out there is it's bringing a lot more people into beer, because it was seen as a very male pursuit. And I say this, very self-aware as a man, that these were very male-dominated spaces, not just in pubs and bars, but people working at breweries. But that's changed a great deal. Not enough, but it is changing, especially here in London where I live. If you go out for a beer in some of the great pubs, it's a 50-50 split of men and women, and it feels this isn't everywhere, but in a lot of places it feels quite inclusive and normal, because it is normal. But the great thing about all these different styles is that it helps people find a beer that, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like beer, I don't drink beer," and that just means you probably haven't found the beer for you yet. And if you never find it, that's fine. I'm not of the stand on a pedestal and say you must drink beer, because there's a lot of delicious things out there. I love wine, I love cider, and lots of other things. But it is exciting when someone discovers a beer for the first time, and realizes there's so much out there. So yeah.
No, that's really cool. The variety is absolutely amazing. I mean, I never knew there was anything like this, and it's been really good for me recently, where I've tried things like Beer52, and I started this idea of trying to support some of the local breweries. So I know you were born this way, so there's one in Nottinghamshire called Pheasantry, and that's probably my favourite one. There's one called, I think it's Exciter, and then it's Dragonfly, and that, to me, it's a traditional, but I just find them so beautiful. They're not too gassy, they're not too acidic, and as someone who struggles with diet, because I have lactose, I'm lactose intolerant. I have problems drinking things like orange, pineapple, stuff like that. So I've got to be careful on the flavoured beer as well, because it'll blow me up in essence.
Yeah, this is something that's come up actually. It's interesting to hear you are lactose intolerant, because lactose has become like a really popular ingredient that brewers are experimenting with. But obviously, that excludes a lot of people from trying it. But so hopefully, it's just a flash in the pan, and breweries don't get too down that rabbit hole of that ingredient. Because also lactose also stops beer being vegan, because otherwise it would be a vegan product. But once you put because lactose is developed from cow's milk, it would not be a vegan beer anymore. And I'm all about beer being as open and available to as many people as possible. So removing barriers like that, it seems like a simple thing to me. I don't want to stand in the way of experimentation either, but there should be something for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And I know when I've seen some of these, there's been like chocolate flavour, and there's like chocolate porters, coffee ones, and again, like I can't stand coffee. So I think, I can't eat chocolate, you see. So some of them sort of flavours I'll never drink, and that's tough, isn't it?
That is very unfortunate. There are some delicious beers out there, but it's also there are plenty of delicious beers out there that don't include lactose. So there's plenty more to discover.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things I thought of about this supporting a local business idea, how do you keep that going though? Because you could go along the lines of supporting your local pub, but I'm not a frequent pub goer. I don't know enough people to go sit in the pub with. It would have to be sort of like a special event or something like that. I mean, how do people fit this in now?
It's tough, especially because supermarkets make things convenient, and a lot of people don't want to spend too long out the house at the moment. I'm very lucky where I live. Yeah. I live in a part of London at the moment called Crouch End, only for another month because I'm moving to Manchester with my partner Diane. in 4 weeks' time, which is very exciting. I'm looking forward to getting back
Oh.
to the north. But I have lived in London for 15 years, and I'm very lucky in Crouch End that there's a lot of independent shops that are really good. So there's several greengrocers, fishmongers, bakers, butchers, really great produce. And I don't go to them all the time because they're more expensive, but the quality of product they do is great. And in the case, the one I do go to every week for a loaf of bread is Dunn's, my local bakers, which just does fantastic bread, and it's not that expensive. It's a few pence more for much higher quality. So I'm lucky that I've got that in walking distance. It's an advantage of living in a big city. In terms of beer and in terms of what's happened just in generally, I think the internet is crucial to so much of this. I mean, in terms of beer, there's a lot of what we call them bottle shops. I guess you would call them off licenses previously, but bottle shops, which is a term that came out of Australia, I think, but is generally a term for a modern beer shop that has a big selection. And Lincoln, where you are, has a great one right at the base of Steep Hill called the Crafty Bottle, and I always pop in there for a few beers when I come back to Lincoln to see my mum. And I usually nip into the Straight and Narrow opposite actually for a beer. One thing that is an advantageous of my job is I've become quite used to just traveling on my own and going for a beer on my own, which is probably not a normal thing for a lot of people, but in beer that sort of, I can remember years ago I used to be quite anxious at doing such a thing, but now it's not even a second thought. If I just see a nice pub, I go and, well, this is before COVID obviously, but if I saw a nice pub, I just go in and sit and have a beer and take it all in, because that's all part of the experience that I write about. But in terms of going back to your question, in terms of supporting small businesses, I think it's, something that's really evident to me is that you can't be expected to spend your money on the top dollar premium product all the time, and a great beer is really expensive. But if you can allocate, if you love your beer, consider allocating what you would have spent in the pub before it was going to the pub was perhaps more difficult like it is now, and spending that on some nice beers and going online and there's loads of great independent shops online, and you can do this with almost anything these days, with your veg boxes and stuff. And I think it's supporting local is difficult, but when you support a local business, you're investing money directly back into the economy around you, rather than just letting it go into the ether. And then if you think about it on a bigger picture, there's a lot of these big corporations like Amazon. I try and avoid using Amazon because they're not paying the full rate of corporation tax because of the way the business is set up. And that means that if you're spending your money there, that most of that money that's not going to come back into your economy. But if you shop local, you can be confident that all of that money is going to go back into your local economy, because it's, as well as all the tax going into the local tax system, the people who work there's wages, they're going to spend that locally too. So I'm a huge advocate for small businesses, and I've got a lot of friends who own small beer businesses, and breweries are the same. And that it's a real struggle for them at the moment, and any sale is a bonus. But in a lot of the breweries, a great example of where I'm moving, there's a brewery called Cloudwater that are very popular, and they moved to direct online sales at the start of the lockdown, and because a lot of these places were selling draft beer, and they couldn't sell kegs of beer and casks of beer into pubs anymore because the pubs weren't open. So they started selling bottles and cans online, and this has been huge for the breweries that have been able to do this. Not every brewery is set up with the right equipment to package in bottle and can in house, but the ones that are, they actually probably saw a bit of an uptick in those sales because people were wanting to buy beer to drink at home. So I guess if you're reading a magazine like Ferment, as we talked earlier, in the magazine I run, Pellicle, then you'll be able to read about the kind of beer businesses, the breweries and the bottle shops and the pubs that are local that do need your support. And saying what I said earlier, it's important to help out where you can and within your means. You should never feel forced, though, to just go and spend all your money at these places. But you can if you want to. And I have to confess I do regularly, which is why I'm always skint.
Yeah, no, that's fair comment. Well, I think that there's like a couple of arguments. Like, for instance, one thing I see is people like Brewdog. What they're doing is great. They advertise on Facebook and things like that. And the amount of stupid comments you get off people that are, oh, it's so-and-so pound in Morrison's. Well, yes, it is, because they buy in such bulk and probably don't give much money back to Brewdog.
I would. Brewdog's an interesting one because they are technically the largest independent brewery in the country now, and I've known that because of my work. I've known them since they were a much smaller brewery, and they serve I think it's important to recognise that Brewdog is a very big company. It's multinational. They've got breweries in America, Germany, and Australia, as well as brew pubs here. They've got one in London. They've got one in Dublin. They're a big company, but they do a lot of things to like. They're doing a showcase because they've got 55 bars in the country, or probably more than that now. But they're showcasing the smallest up and coming new breweries in by giving them space, and a lot of big breweries don't do that. And I've had my fallings out with people who follow me online will know I've had my fallings out with Brewdog over the years, and I've also, like, in 2016, one of my first articles as a full-time professional writer was about them, and that was quite a nice article. So I've had an interesting relationship with them at the moment. I think they've been responding really well to the lockdown. It's been difficult for them because they've got thousands of staff, and some of the initiatives they've done, like they're planting a huge forest, I think 2,000 acres or something. That I said that off the cuff, so forgive me if that's incorrect. But they're planting a large forest to. They're actually a carbon negative company, making beer with using wind power to power their brewery in Aberdeenshire. So things like that have been really positive, and they also come out in support of their fellow small brewers because they know where they came from. It was only they started in 2007, and they make a product. Their main product, their Punk IPA and their other core brands. They are an interesting bridge now between, I guess, what you would call really specialist beer, craft beer, microbrewed beer. Call it whatever you like. They're all meaningless terms. But I would call it craft beer because that's a great way of describing sort of a modern, high quality product. And their beer is probably a little bit more expensive than the big brands like your Stellas and your Carlings, but it's quite a bit cheaper than some of the smaller breweries because they've got economies of scale on their side. They can make a lot of beer, whereas most small breweries, it's all manual. They can't buy ingredients in bulk. Beer costs a lot of money to make, and that's another podcast episode entirely. But Brewdog's an important brand, and anyone I know is listening to this going like, "Oh, you've changed your tune," because I've been quite negative about them in the past. But I spend a lot of time thinking about these things because it's my job, and at the moment, I'm I've made peace with what Brewdog do and where they sit in the market. The only thing I worry is when a smaller brewery tries to chase that kind of price point and the supermarkets that they do, because it's such a risky strategy. You'll see Brewdog in the supermarkets forever. That they're here to stay. But some of the smaller brands that you might see alongside them now, who knows? The supermarket listings are fickle. Which again comes back to supporting local, supporting direct when you can. Because you know where your money's going and who it's supporting. But I think that answers your question. I hope so.
No, that's cool. I mean, obviously, what you do is an important element of getting information out there to people. I mean, obviously, you've got your writing side, you've now got your own magazine, you're doing your own podcast, and you're a photographer as well. I mean, you're just greedy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when I started, I wanted to be a writer. I always enjoyed writing, even before I knew and I realized I would like to do this for a living. Because when I was writing blogs about different subjects before I started writing about beer, it was January 2012, I started a beer blog called Total Ales, and I wanted to write, but I never considered writing as a career because how do you make it pay? And now I do it. It's still I'll explain how I make it pay, but like at the start, that was never my intention. I just needed an output for my hobby. But when I started working for Ferment, I started writing for a publication in the US called Good Beer Hunting, based in Chicago, and in order to there are a lot of great established beer writers out there who've become friends and mentors. Just to name a few: Adrian Tierney Jones, Pete Brown, and Melissa Cole. They've been doing this a bit longer than I have, and they're great friends and advisors. But I wanted to make myself stand out, and so I invested in some photography equipment, and I started using the Sony mirrorless cameras, and then invested in some lenses and started. I was always into photography, and so just started experimenting with sort of reportage street photography, turning up at breweries and saying, "Can I take some photos of you making beer?" Rather than just photos. I've always wanted to avoid cliche in photography, so I wanted to sort of like give a bird's eye view of the brewery floor. That was my initial idea, and that took off. That's something that I picked up quite quickly, and I would by no means call myself an expert, but I've been doing the photography for about 6 years now. So that's nothing really, but I just invested myself really heavily in my practice, especially not the sort of shooting and the framing of shots came quite naturally to me, but where I spent my time was in the edit and learning my software and studying what techniques people use to make photos really pop. And I think that's sort of like the difference. I started to consider photos like I would a paragraph in an article. Like, how do I make this? How do I get my point across as succinctly as possible? And how do I draw? It's all about drawing attention to the key details, isn't it? So with photography, it became, I wanted to have this bird's eye view of the brewery floor. And it did in the early days when I was trying to make a break and get commissioned to write paid features. Being able to say I can take my own photos was a bonus. And throw a few photos in, and that like my writing evolved from blogging into professional writing. So too did the photography. When a couple of breweries, I think there's a brewery in London, a few years ago, it would have been about 5 years ago, they approached me and said, "We'd like some advice on photography, Matt, because we really like your photos. What should we do to take better photos?" And I replied, "Well, you could pay me to take some." Or ever the entrepreneur. And so they did hire me to come in every few months and do some sort of photos of the staff and photos of the beers, but also photos of people making beer on the brewery floor that they could use on their website, on social media. And I can't speak highly enough of transparency and giving, say supporting local, show them what they're supporting. If you can see the people like working hard, making something, it becomes so much more tangible and so much more real. And that's where the joy of the photography came out. So it's interesting because photography started as a hobby to support, then it became a sort of support of my professional work, and now it's fully integral, and it's led me to the big project I just got signed up to do last month. Was so I'm doing my first big book, and it's for CAMRA, the Campaign for Real Ale. They have a publishing wing, and it's called Modern British Beer. Is the working title, and it's a series of short essays on important beers that have shaped where British beer is now. But I'm doing all the photography for it too, and I've got to visit 80 breweries, which is all right. I mean,
Wow.
I've been to something like 800 to 1,000 breweries around the world through my work, but yeah, to do that and then submit, a lot of words by the end of March. That's my big task now. So that'll be nice to have I've got the magazine stuff, the regular columns, which is like my bread and butter that keeps me in rent and food. But a big project like this comes along, and it's not just, I mean, it's a paid opportunity. It's great to work on that, but it's also to work on something that size. And then when, I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, but to think, oh, I'm going to have this this big book with my name on the front of it. That's a really exciting prospect. So that'll be out. Modern British Beer. That'll be out, assuming I hit my deadline. And the reason I managed to do this for a living is I'm quite good at hitting deadlines. It's really important. If you work for someone and you file it on time, they will probably ask you to work for them again. That's really important. But around this time next year, I should have a couple of books out. A little guide to London pubs I've been working on, and this big book too. So again, like you said, I'm greedy, but you didn't know how far that was going. But I think that greediness comes from the fact is I'm freelance. I work for myself, and I have a very weird job. A lot of people say, "Oh, you have the best job in the world, tasting all these beers." And do you know what? I have my dream job. I love beer. It's my obsession and fascination. The whole process, from the farming to growing barley to growing hops to fermentation and brewing and fermentation, and into the sales and the marketing side of it, to the drinking it. Every stage of it is fascinating. But covering that as a writer, you've got to cover all your bases. So by doing writing, photography, the podcast for Pellicle as well, it kind of covers all these bases. I'm kind of selling myself, and by doing that, I'm able to get enough regular work to make it into a job. It's not a profitable job. I used to work in distribution, not in beer, before I worked in my current job, and if I'd stayed there, I'd probably be making quite a bit more money. It's the freedom of working for myself which I think a lot of people are probably discovering at the moment, and working from home and having that getting out of the sort of commute and the office life. It's quite liberating, and that's if the great thing is, when travel was allowed, to be able to say, right, I'm researching this, and there's this thing in America, this event that's happening, so yeah, I can afford that, and I'll go to that and research some stuff, and I'll get some interviews, and I'll meet some people, and that's kind of where I was. I mean, if things had gone on as normal, I'd probably been, by this time of year, I've been to America a couple of times. I was going to go to Copenhagen and the Czech Republic and all of these lovely places, which one day I'll be able to go to again, just not right now. So, and as you said, I'm greedy because I've been hogging the airtime for quite a few minutes now. But obviously you've got me talking about beer, which is my favorite subject, and freelancing, which is my second favorite subject.
No, that's really nice, because your passion obviously comes out in your words. It comes out in your photography and your writing. So it's really nice.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to do this work, and it's really great when I hear people like you say, "Oh, I really enjoyed that article," because my perspective is, when I finish an article, it's filed, and I've got to find the next thing that's gonna earn money. It's it's a job to job economy. So sometimes I don't know when things are coming out and keeping up with my own workload. But it's so when someone does turn around and stops and says, "Oh, I really enjoyed this," it's a really great feeling.
Yeah, I think that's common in all blogging, to be honest, when you get that sort of feedback. And I'm the same, I've blogged for since I left uni about 8 years ago, and then it turned into photography recently. And I just find it adds to what you do, whether it's an explanation and it's more of a guide of how to do something, or whether it was about an experience you had, or whether it's just a gallery on something. They all provide different things,
Yeah,
don't they?
absolutely.
It was interesting what you said about taking a picture. You're seeing it as a way of describing something. So for you, when you're writing for other people, does your imagery, does the wording they put in complement your image, or do you have to take an image to complement their writing?
I think it's a sort of a mutual process. I mean, I think I can explain this really well because now I run Pellicle. That's a very different experience for me as the editor in chief, because when you're a writer, you come up with an idea, you pitch it to an editor, and they say yes or no, and hopefully they say yes, because that means you've got a chance to earn some money, but also to do some good work and make something that people are going to appreciate reading. But so flip that around, and now I'm the editor, and people send me ideas, and it's quite advantageous coming from a writing background, because I with Pellicle I have a very strong idea of what I want, and so I hate turning down pitches, but I get a lot, and unfortunately we're a small publication with it. We're self-funded and funded by our readers who choose to do a voluntary subscription every month, and so I have to make sure I'm putting content that I would enjoy reading. That's the first question, and then I have to also consider all the people that read the site. Like, will this engage with our readership? So we have to find some sort of consistency and familiarity in our narratives, so to speak. And so when I was writing, I was able to offer my own photography. So when I was writing a profile of a particular brewery, I would go down with my camera and my notepad, and I'd come back with all of the information I needed. So they would complement each other. But when I started commissioning work for Pellicle, sometimes I'd hire a writer, and they're like, "Oh, I don't take photographs," and so I'd have to think, well, I need images. And something that helped with my own photography is I started to consider the images as editorial, and I find a lot of the time sometimes images can be, especially in a lot of mainstream publishing, the image can be the sort of afterthought. Like let's get the story, get the words, and then we'll figure it out. And I don't want to really compromise on both, because for me, whether we get an illustrator to draw or paint something up for us, or we get a photographer to shoot it, that the narrative that they do is just as important. Generally, though, process wise, the words will come first, and then we will send the person they'll have a draft of that article when they go to take the photographs, or if they're illustrating. Not always, though. Sometimes you're on a short time span. So this is where communication comes into it, and a good pitch will give you a good angle, and then you can relay that to a photographer. Or one of my favorite things to do, some of the articles we've done on Pellicle, is we've had a writer and I've gone, this photographer would be really good. And then you put them in touch, and they do the visit together. So they get to talk about it and direction and share work as they're working on it. And that's really, that collaborative process is really great to see. you know what, that's really tough at the moment because of COVID, and
Yeah.
but I've been gradually getting out there and visiting places again, and generally like breweries are pretty socially distant places anyway. The breweries are full of very dangerous things like boiling liquids and chemicals and cleaning agents and high pressure gases, and so you generally stay away from things while you're on a brewery floor. Um, so
Mm.
yeah, that I think that it's I think the important thing is always consider both. They complement each other. Like for me, they both form part of a narrative structure, and if you nail them both, if you get them both right, you create a far more compelling story, you keep the reader engaged all the way through, which is the real challenge, because in today's sort of Instagram, Twitter world, people have got seconds of attention span. So when we're putting out 2,000 word articles, how are you
Yeah.
going to ensure people are going to read past the first paragraph? And great writing, obviously,
Yeah.
but if you've got some strong images in there as well, they're hooked, and it keeps them reading till the end. So that's why it's so important, just to keep that engagement up.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's experience. I mean, I did my first group shoot with a couple of models, June, July time, let's say, and I'm a film shooter, so I literally only shot film. So I took probably 16 exposures, and that was it. So you can imagine that's quite a slow pace. It means people stood around for quite a while. I've done my photos, right? What do you want to do now? Um, and what I did was decided to only show 3 photos online, and then I got people to read my blog article I wrote about it. And it was sort of like a hook of, here's 3 nice photos. There's a lot more on my website. I'm talking about COVID and how nervous I was about meeting people again, because, like yourself, I've been working from home, and I literally not been out of my house other than fresh air with my daughters. I don't go near supermarkets. I haven't been near any shops. So for me, it was a lot scarier than I'd ever been in my life.
Yeah, I went through so I probably had COVID in March. I was very poorly, with all the
Oh
symptoms,
dear.
and you'd think, oh, I've had it, I've probably got a bit of immunity, but I worried about the possibility of giving it to other people, or I didn't know anything about it. And when I got it in March, there was, I tried to get a test, and they said no, key workers only, and unfortunately, beer writers are not key workers. um, but yeah, if you read the list of symptoms, even the loss of smell and taste, I had everything, and I was quite poorly for about 2 weeks. Not fortunately, not poorly enough to have to go to hospital, but it made me very. I think anyone who's been had a friend or have been infected by it themselves are probably the most cautious people, because they know how nasty it is, and you become more cautious. And this is, so I'm a pub person. I spent a lot of time out and about. I live in London, great big city with so much going on, and on a Friday, I would love to hopefully finish my work and then just like jump on the tube, and but I'd like to go somewhere like Hackney for some beers, where there's a favorite pub of mine. And you know what? I've not been since July the 4th, when it reopened, but the Pembury Tavern in Hackney. I would love to go there. They do like really great pizzas. The chef there, Rachel, is just does amazing pizzas. The beer is from a local brewery, the 5 Points, who I used to do a bit of photography for, and it was just such a great vibe. All the locals there on a Friday, it's buzzing. And I think I've not been because I'm scared that it's, I've been going to the pub, and I've ordered on apps, and it's and you've got to check in, and I'm not used to it yet. I'm calling it finding my pub legs again, because I miss it. And I don't think I've been to this particular pub the Pembury, because I've got a sort of cemented in my mind of what it was like before lockdown, and I want that. I want to go there and just see all my friends and be hugging and drinking pints and just having a good time. And I know if I go now, it'll be sat at a table, get the app, order. You've got 2 hour booking at your table. What if I don't have a booking? Sorry, we've got no room. We're fully booked, and they, half the tables are gone. So it's a very surreal environment, and adapting to that change has been difficult. And now we're obviously facing, Bolton's on the news today because it's pretty much gone into lockdown, and it's a case. We're helpless. We just got to wait and see. Really, it's you can do right by each other and try and do social distancing and all that, but I am, and it's a shame why I've not got back to Lincoln. And my mum's in her 60s, and I'd love to be able to jump on a train and come see her, but she's not had it, and I wouldn't dare risk it. So it's a difficult situation, and it made my job very, very difficult. At the start of lockdown, I was like, well, how's this going to carry on? Am I going to have a job at the end of this? Like a lot of people. Thankfully, I was, I've got a lot of good editors and regular work and my own website, and I was able to just trundle along and keep going. And things are back to normal now in terms of my work, which is great. And in terms of getting out there, it's just I'm taking it one day at a time. On Friday last week, I thought, right, I always just spend Friday on my own, and Diane will come home from work, and we haven't got kids, we've just got a cat, so we would just watch telly, maybe order some nice food in, because a lot of the restaurants are doing delivery now, and we'd put our feet up on a Friday. But this Friday I was like, right, I'm going to get out, I'm going to go for a walk, and it only takes me 25 minutes to get to central London on a train. So I jumped on the train, and there's a lot of overground trains as well, so I didn't have to go on the underground. I went to Finsbury Park and got the train to Blackfriars Station, which is right on the river. And then I walked along the South Bank. And if you've not been to London before, the South Bank is a very touristy area, and it has street performers, and it has loads of bars and restaurants, and there's people doing exercise, running and cycling up and down it. And you've got things like the Globe Theatre and the Tate Modern and the South Bank Centre. It's a cultural hub for London. And I went, and it was like a ghost town. It was like maybe 1/5 of the normal amount of people. And I was walking around, and a lot of the restaurants have opened again. They've been doing eat out to help out and all that. And but this was a Friday, and people were out and about, but it didn't have that buzz. And I've got a friend who has a little open air bar there, which is why I chose this, because it's outside, called the Hop Locker, and it sells craft beer, and it's all from small breweries around the UK. So I settled in and outside his stand and just had some distance pints. I met a couple of friends because they're leaving. They're going to New Zealand. Everyone's leaving. Everyone's bailing out of London. That's what's going to happen now. But just doing that, and then getting the train home, and I got home at like 10, not too late. And it just felt nice to have been out. And I woke up in the morning thinking, I feel a bit more chipper today because I did get out, and got those endorphins going from seeing a couple of people. But I'm still at the back of my mind, always on guard, and just trying to be, just looking out for each other. That's what it is, because that's why we've got to be good with these restrictions, just to make sure everyone's okay. So yeah, sorry, no short answers to any of your questions tonight.
Well, you can tell you're well versed into doing this, so it makes a change. So it's nice. It's very strange times. I mean, whether we'll see a few companies go under, it's probably inevitable. But I see you doing other things, which is obviously going to change as well. I saw the Beer Guild was advertising some training you were going to do.
So I'm the British Guild of Beer Writers has been around since the 80s. And it might seem a bit weird to have a British Guild of Beer Writers, but if you look into it, there's a lot of writers' guilds. There's a guild of wine writers, a guild of food writers, a guild of travel writers. I'm only in the beer one, but I'm probably going to join the food one as well. And the idea of the guilds is they promote members' work and promote the medium of these sort of specialist writing areas. And the guild, I've actually just joined the board, the committee. It's called a board of directors because it's set up as a company, but it's a committee. And I was on it before when I just started getting into beer writing, and I've had a few years away. So I'm really looking forward to being a bit more proactive in what it's doing. But the photography thing, it's the second time I've done a photography course for members. The first one was very much sort of an introduction to photography, and I talked a lot about my approach, but also my philosophy of photography, and it was good. But the feedback was people wanted a bit more of a hands-on thing. So, and so I've said I'm not going to answer your questions on taking photos with your smartphones or anything like that. We're going to concentrate on proper equipment, and then but the real focus will be on the approach to shoots, what you want to get out of it, and how you're going to deal with the edit. Looking at beer specifically. So one of the questions I got was not everyone wants to take reportage photography. Like, how do you make a good photo? How do you make beer stand out in the glass? How do you make a pint of beer look appealing? And not everyone has access to, I mean, I've just got getting started with lightbox photography and that sort of thing, just because I've got clients who I do more on location stuff saying, can we send you a couple of things to do some clean product shots for us? So, that's learning on the job, because, very rarely are you in a position where you can afford to turn down work when you do it for a living. And so that's been a bit fun. I've got a really interesting job tomorrow, actually. A brewery in Manchester called Marble have got a couple of beers coming out, and they want me to take the photos that will be used for the labels. And they've got lots of fruit in them, these beers. So I have to go to my greengrocers tomorrow morning and buy 4 pineapples to chop up for a pineapple beer, and try and make that into sort of an appealing label. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I'm going to make a lot of mess chopping up fruit in my kitchen tomorrow. But coming back to this this talk I'm doing next month for the Guild of Beer Writers it's focusing on considering beer photography specifically and in line with editorial, so with your writing, how it fits in, and also then making sure that the photos are as good as they can be. So there'll be a lot of talk about like my post-production techniques, which aren't maybe sort of classically trained photography production techniques, but certain things I've learned through being a specialist photographer that mostly just takes photos of beer, and that really make these sort of images pop and make them, how to make someone be able to reach into a photo and feel like they can almost drink it. That's a really satisfying feeling when you can produce an image that does that. And it's also, when you're in a brewery, you don't always have great lighting, and the conditions are difficult. So part of it will be like, I'm very, very lucky with a lot of the equipment I use, a lot of very wide aperture prime lenses that work really well in low light. I'm a big fan of the Sony A7 mirrorless cameras for shooting in difficult circumstances, and also being very light and portable when you're walking around a brewery all day and it's a long day. It's a bit easier on the wrists. So that kind of thing. I try, just because I use those doesn't mean they're the only thing that works really well. There's a lot of brands. I'm not particularly tied to any brand, but it's I think that answers your question.
I mean, the other thing, obviously, on top of your photography, is this podcasting. So I'd listened to an episode of Pellicle, and I'd also listened to an old one you did with Chosen Brew.
Yes, so I was a guest on that one. That was a lot of that was a lot of fun. I got to talk about sort of my 6 desert island beers. That was a really interesting show to be a part of.
Yeah, I think what I got from these two was Chosen Brew. He was talking about Northern Pride. That seemed to be the main thing for me. He was saying there's definitely a difference between the north of the UK and the south.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run my own podcast, Pellicle Magazine. If you want to read the magazine, by the way, pelliclemag.com. But there is a podcast as well. And I've done about 14 episodes. And I want to do. I started doing my own podcast just because, and we were talking about this before we started recording, weren't we? Where I said it's about reaching a wider audience, and not everyone has the time to read stuff. As much as I'd like them to, it's not reality. But podcasts, you can have it on when you're driving, when you're out for a jog, when you're at work. You know, they're accessible in different situations. So it was very important to me to make sure that the content we made at Pellicle was able to reach as wide an audience as possible. So if you can find the Pellicle podcast, if you search for the Pellicle podcast on pretty much anything, Apple, Spotify. I've tried to make it everywhere, so it should be. But the Chosen Brews one was interesting because that's not my podcast. It's a chap from Liverpool, but he's based in Australia. And he, which is the great thing about podcasting, you know, we're doing this online. You can do it from anywhere, really. My decision is that I'm going to continue mine when I can do them in person, because that's just it means I can put it on hold for a little while. But that's something I'm gonna pick up in a few weeks or months, whenever people start to feel comfortable to do that again. I'll have to get some sanitizing spray for my microphones, of course. No, he asked me to pick 6 beers, and honestly, actually, if he asked me again, I'd pick 6 different beers. A couple of the breweries in that episode have done some things that I'm not particularly pleased with, so I wouldn't recommend their beers at the moment. But that's such is the nature of the industry. But in terms of what you coming back to Northern Pride is, and I say this as a Londoner, as a proud Londoner, you know, I was born in Lincoln, and I'm proud to be from Lincoln, and I'm still a passionate Lincoln City Football Club supporter. We were losing 1-0 before I came on this podcast. I haven't checked what the score was, but so as I say this as a proud Londoner, that when I visit the north, and in my work, and I go to Leeds, and I go to Manchester, and I go to I was in Macclesfield at the beginning of March, right before this all went mad, and I was in Liverpool the week after that. In fact, coming back to, yes, I had COVID. I was in Liverpool for a beer conference the same time as many thousands of people from Madrid were there to see a certain football match, and who I might have been staying in the same hotel as many of them, which would explain why a couple of days later I got very poorly. But that's besides the point. So, you know, I spend a lot of time traveling to the north, and there's a different attitude to pubs and beer up there. There's a lot more pride, because and I'm culpable in this. You know, the media, the beer media, is so heavily based in London, and it's not just beer; it's everything really. That the north doesn't get talked about in the same way. So that puts people in a position of being, you know, everyone's an advocate for their stuff. And I always used to think it was a bit of north-south divide. And I love the south. I love going to the South Downs, south of London. I've got a friend with a brewery in Southampton. I was in Cornwall at the end of last year. It's great, but there's a different attitude up north, and which I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it. Ask me again in a couple of months when I've been living in Manchester for a month. And I'll probably be able to give you a better answer, but it's a feeling, and it's great. Something I really like because a lot of people think that because of the internet and because of travel and because of trains that can take you all over the country in a couple of hours, we've lost a lot of regionality. And I don't think that's true. And I actually think the way the world is now, and it's a difficult time, it's as a lot of the regionality is coming out through that pride and that support. If you're supporting local, you're going to create that regional difference in terms of like food. There's a great example in beer, and I don't know who drinks sparkled beer or sparkle real ale in a pub where they pull the beer on cask on hand pull through a nozzle called a sparkler, which gives smaller bubbles and a tight creamy head. And in the south, so the south has a reputation for beer with no head, and I have seen that. It's not really the truth. If in a good pub, they'll serve you a proper beer, but not through a sparkler. In the north, they serve beer through this nozzle, which gives it a much sort of bigger, creamier head and smaller bubbles, which means you can take big gulps and it's less gassy. And I love it. It's a little thing. It causes such a divide in the beer world, and I actually quite enjoy stoking the fire a bit because it's a bit of fun, poking the wasp's nest on an argument over a little plastic nozzle. But what I find is there's a lot of pride in the serve in the north. I guess the other thing is because of my, it's all about perspective, and I live in London, and so much of what people think of as London is the West End or the South Bank where I was. That is, people work there and people do live there, but it's not really a reflection of what London is actually like. Where I live in Crouch End in North London, it's very quiet. There's no cars going past. It's pretty quiet. It's very different experience to all that. So I think when people think of London, it's not quite what people think, despite it being on the doorstep. But because of that, a lot of these sort of pubs in central, around Oxford Street, they're not really a reflection of like the best. There are some really good examples, but not the really reflection of the best of London, what London has to offer. So, and I think because of that, there's less pride there because it's just serving a function rather than something to be proud of. If that makes sense. So we'll find out. We'll find out in a couple of months' time. I'll have started to get my feet under the table in Manchester, and I'll be able to really see if what I believe on my visits is the truth.
Yeah, that would be an interesting article, then, isn't it? Northern Pride. We're through the formal part of the interview, Matthew, and what I like to do is have a little bit of fun and ask my guests some silly, random questions.
I love silly, random questions. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good. So what I'll do is I'll start you off on a very easy one. So what's your biggest disappointment in photography?
Oh, my biggest disappointment. Every single overexposed photo I've ever taken. No. I'm trying to think of a very specific example. I went to meet a very prominent brewery owner, and I had half an hour interview and then get some photos. And I had a lot of beer during the interview, and I didn't take a single in focus shot of this brewery owner, and because I was sort of too busy chatting away, from this podcast, I like to talk, and I grabbed a few shots, and none of them were in focus. And I had to, for the article, I had to go back to the press team and say, "Can you provide me with some photography because mine didn't come out?" So, I think that taught me to always put it in burst mode when I'm taking portraits and check them before I go home. So I guess that's it. But the other thing is, every time I take a really overexposed, washed out picture of the sky, that's no amount of editing can save.
Well, as a film shooter, you don't need to know how many weird and wonderful combinations of black and pure white photos I've got. So,
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, no, I like that. So, when will we start using the term hit women or hit people instead of hit men?
Oh, in terms of like assassinations.
Yeah.
I don't know that. You did say these are going to be random questions, and you've absolutely got me. I'm sure there are. I have to say, the industry of offing people is not one I'm up to date with, and
Oh, good.
I don't know. Hit people. I mean, to bring this back to beer, people, you don't use the term barmaid or waitress. It's bartender or just server or wait staff. So
Okay.
maybe hit tender, to use a bartender term. I don't know. Kill tender. I don't
Mm,
know. It's um, yeah, absolutely flummoxed me with that one.
okay.
So, but
No, okay. We'll only get
okay,
started on here.
hit me with the next one.
Okay, so how would you ban
Oh,
daydreaming?
lobotomies. Just a steel spike
Ah,
inserted through the nose. I mean, if you spend enough time scrolling through social media, you're basically self-lobotomizing yourself anyway these days. So speed it up with a short, sharp spike to the frontal lobe and drift into endless oblivion.
so that could be the next marketing thing by
Yeah, just
Instagram.
just attach the
Free
spike to the front
lobotomies.
of your phone, and then just nod vigorously instead of double tapping, and enhance your experience immediately.
Nailed it.
Literally to the frontal lobe.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. When you reach heaven, you get to trade the kudos and karma you've earned all your life into a reward. What will be your reward?
Oh, a hamburger. Just a really good cheeseburger, and if I'm lucky, a nice pint of American West Coast IPA to go with it. That's it. If I get one last thing, that's it. All the good you can do. Just a really nice, juicy cheeseburger, and a pint of beer. That's it, and that's it. I'm done. Nothing left to live for.
Well, to be fair, you've made it to the main
There you
place
go.
as well. So yeah, so
Mm.
it's double bonus. Okay, no, I like that. You come home and find a spider ironing, a shark washing up, and an octopus playing your guitar. Which would scare you the most?
Probably the octopus, because the octopus is a way more intelligent than you think, and
Hmm.
than most people think. And I do have a few nice guitars. I used to be quite into I used to work in the musical instrument industry, and if I saw an octopus on my Fender Telecaster, it'd probably be a lot better than me, and that would scare me. Well, no, it wouldn't really, because I'm not that good. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest shock. I mean, the shark and the spider. I mean, I just think, well, that's it. But with the octopus, would genuinely be like a very scary moment. I nearly swore there. I'm not sure of them, but yeah, the octopus.
Okay, I like that. For your final one, so you get to either punch, give a present, or have a pint with each of the following. So you've got Matthew the
Mm.
Apostle, Matthew Broderick, or Matt Smith,
As
as in the
Doctor
Doctor
Who,
Who's
Matt
Matt
Smith,
Smith.
and Doctor. Uh, so punch, uh,
Punch, present, or pint.
present, or pint. Well. Mm, do you know what? This is very, very challenging. I'm having a quick bit of deliberation here. So,
Can you really punch someone with a biblical figure?
well, I'd have a pint with Matthew the Apostle, because
Okay.
that there's he was a tax man, wasn't he? So he could probably help me with my accounts. So I want to keep him sweet. I would give a present to Matthew Broderick for his fabulous work in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and the criminally underrated Inspector Gadget. And unfortunately, this means I'd have to punch Matt Smith for being less good at being the Doctor than David Tennant. Or just being wildly young and successful. I mean, yeah. I'm not. I'm not much of a puncher, but I'm afraid he's just drawn. It's just a case of drawing the short straw there. So he's gonna get a smiting.
Okay, I like that. Well, thank you so much for going through that.
That was a very different experience for me. So thank you. That was I'm still thinking about the hitman hit women question. It's going to keep me awake all night.
Just in case it comes up in a pub quiz. Yeah. No, that's cool. So do you want to just remind everybody where they can check out your work?
Thank you. So please check out Pellicle Magazine. You can find us at www.pelliclemag.com. And we're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at Pellicle Mag. And if you want to follow me personally on Twitter and Instagram, my username is at Total Curtis. So Curtis is my surname. And Total Ales was the first name of my first beer blog, so that's where Total Curtis comes from. So you can find me on there, and I'm there's rarely a moment I'm not on Twitter chatting away, and you can just continue the conversation. I'm always up for it.
No, that's cool. Thank you for that. And the last thing I always do with my guests, I do this paid forward scheme. Is there anyone you think would like to come onto the show? Someone who's maybe from a different genre, someone maybe you admire, a friend or something?
Let me have a quick think. You did put this in the in your briefing, and I was like, who? And I was having a think, and I'm trying to think of a really interesting person. So. I'm going to think of a photographer friend of mine in Yorkshire, actually, a guy called Mark Newton, and I can send you his details.
Okay.
So Mark Newton is a fantastic photographer. He's done some stuff with us at Pellicle, and I'm a big fan of his. I mean, he's an incredible photographer, and if you go on to Pellicle, there's a lovely story about Appleton's Butchers in Harrogate in Yorkshire, in Ripon, and they make amazing pork pies. And the photos there, you'll be so hungry after seeing them. He's ridiculously talented. So thinking about photography, I think he deserves to be a lot more well known because for his talents, and he's done a few bits for us at Pellicle, and long may that continue. So Mark Newton.
Oh, that's nice. No, that's cool. Well, thank you so much for that, Matthew. That sounds a very interesting prospect. It's been really nice talking to you about one of my favourite subjects.
Great. Likewise, really thanks so much for having me on, Andrew. And may you enjoy many delicious new beers.
Well, I hope I'll get some advice off you, that's for sure.
Excellent. I'm always here for beer advice.
Yeah. No problem. You take care.
Cheers.